Good morning, everybody. Welcome to FSU Coach Live. My name's Tim Baghurst, joined today with a special guest, Miriam Hartzler. Miriam, thank you so much for joining us. If you wouldn't mind, just tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, what you're doing, and how you got there.
Absolutely, Tim. I really appreciate the opportunity to join you today and just kind of talk through coaching basketball. It's definitely a passion. I'm the head women's basketball coach at Cairn University, which is in Langhorne, PA, just 25 miles northeast of Philadelphia. I'm completing my first year there coaching. Prior to that, I have coached at the high school level for 14 years. I was out at a school in Kansas City for a couple years as an assistant and the JV coach there, and then came to New Jersey and was at a school running their high school girls basketball program for 13 years. So it's been a great opportunity to learn, and I was definitely excited to step onto the college level, but just love being able to mentor female athletes and using the game of basketball in order to do that.
What then made you decide to take that jump from high school to college?
Absolutely. It was one of those things. I'd kind of had aspirations of coaching at the college level. I know that it's definitely a different beast, just with the recruiting and some of the travel, just really running the program compared to the high school level. So I wanted that challenge. I just wasn't sure if the opportunity would arise or if the right school and fit would come along. And this was one with Cairn University, as they just kind of fell into place. And it's been really neat to join that community there. And having the opportunity, we're a smaller university. We have about 1,000 undergrad students. But being able to be in an environment to learn, to grow, and kind of cut my teeth on it, it's been a great transition.
Well, it's exciting for me for you to be on this show because you're fairly new to the college process. You've been a coach for a long time. What have you learned this year?
I think the first thing coming in to a new community, it's really to get to know the community, getting to know the players. It was a unique situation. I was the third head coach in 3 years. And yet the team there, just the players, they had great previous coaches, Coach Zamros and Coach Wolver, both I stay in contact with, and just the direction of their lives had changed, and that's why the position was open. But being able to connect to the players and to the other members in the athletic department were huge. And I just can't say enough for the Cairn community and how they've just come alongside to support me. But with that, probably the biggest thing is, I mean, at the college level, being a D3 school, NCAA does a great job of letting us know their student athletes first. They aren't there on scholarship. And so being able to come alongside the players and helping them to achieve the success in the classroom, but then also knowing the balance of, we also want to become a winning program. Right. And so how does that look? What are some of the things we need to do as individuals to be able to achieve our goals? And so that was probably the biggest thing, trying to help that I learned as a coach, just knowing that balance. I was used to working with parents at the high school level. Yes, the parent role, I think, is always important, regardless of what level you coach at, especially at the high school level. But college level, you don't have the same interaction with them. And so that was a big adjustment for me, learning how to, the accountability, learning how to connect with my college players, and just kind of set the boundaries and set the structure for the team dynamic that we wanted to create.
Well, I should mention, if you're watching whatever platform you're on, if you have a question, just post it in your chat box and we'll get it to Miriam. One we have, what was your best memory from this season? And I think that's important because sometimes we talk about all the hardships and the challenges. There's also good reasons for being a basketball coach in college.
Absolutely. This season we were 3-22, so we did not win a lot as far as on the scoreboard. But when I think back over the season, this group of players that I had the opportunity to work with this year, I mean, they showed up every day ready to get to work. And part of that was them having the opportunity to get to know me. Part of it was getting to know the system, my terminology, all of it, and working hard. And so as we progressed through the season, we definitely had improvements that we saw, but it didn't necessarily translate to the scoreboard for us as far the win-loss record. It definitely improved on the scoreboard and in the stat sheet. Probably the highlight from this season was our schedule had a Christmas tournament, and we went out to Bluffton, Ohio, which is about a 10-hour ride from where we are in Pennsylvania. And so players had to come back December 26th. And I'll be fully transparent. I was a little worried just being the first year coach and being like, all right, ladies, we're back the day after Christmas. That was a little unusual, I think, for them. But man, I couldn't be happier with the results from that tournament. And I think that was really a great opportunity for us as a team to bond on a different level. One of the statements I like to say is, I mean, we can't always control what life gives us, but when life gives you lemons, we're going to make lemonade. And so that was one of those trips. I mean, it was hard. I had some players that they were honest with me, and I was good with that. It was less than ideal to come back the morning of the 26th so that we could get ready to head out. But that was a great time for us as a team. And I look at that as one of those stepping stones for being able to get to where we really want to go in the future.
Dr. Chris Hobbs was a guest on our show a couple of weeks ago. He says, what was a hard thing that you feel you successfully navigated as a coach, and how did you handle it? Easy question, right?
I know. Yeah, I mean, just thinking back, I think probably one of the hardest things was, and I say it hard, it sounds negative. I just felt for the players, knowing that I was going to be the third coach in 3 years. And like I said, nothing negative to anyone prior at all. But that's just hard on players, not to have the consistency. And so being able to, I think that was the thing that I felt was the most challenging, was how was I going to go in and really kind of recruit the players? I mean, we had 3 seniors that, I mean, they got to play for the same coach their freshman, sophomore year, but there was some question about with internships and just with placements for their degrees and whatnot. I mean, would they continue to play? And I have to say, I mean, Tori, Charlotte, and Jana, they just did a great job, and they hung in there. And so I think part of it was I wanted to give the team the experience that I think is so valuable. I mean, it is about playing basketball. It is about winning. It is about putting that ball in the net. But to me, it's so much bigger than just that. It's the life lessons. There was a book I read years ago, and the first line of the book states, at some point the ball will stop bouncing for all of us. And for some of us, we choose careers in coaching or in athletics, and so it continues to bounce or roll a little bit longer. But for a lot of players, I mean, when they graduate or when they decide to walk away from the game, if it really is just about winning and losing, that's short-sighted in my mind. It's really those character qualities. It's really the life lessons that they can learn inside the lines and that they can take with them outside that I want to have the biggest impact. I want them to be winners in their jobs and their families. I want them to win the game of life as much as I want to win the game of basketball. But I think some of those character qualities that we need to be able to win within the lines are so much more important even once we step out. And so for me, it was creating, what was so hard was creating that experience and giving them that experience and setting the tone in such a way that they could feel like they had a great career at Cairn, regardless of the win-loss record. And so that I think was the biggest challenge coming in, just the unknowns, even with the roster, who had said they were going to play, would they play for the new coach? Could I build those relationships and secure those players back onto the roster spots? And so that was the challenge. But like I said, what a great group that Cairn already had in place as I stepped in.
Another question came in from Nikki, who asks, what is one big lesson that you personally learned during your first year as a collegiate head coach?
You know, probably the biggest thing that has stuck with me is trust the process. It's something as a coach I've used with players, especially training middle schoolers, getting ready for them to come up to the high school, or looking at high school players and trying to prep them as they were getting ready to make their college choices. And that was one of the things that I think as a coach this year at the college level, I had to remind myself, trust the process. Saying is, Rome wasn't built in a day. And the same thing's true for your program. And it's the little details, the emails I make, the connections I make, the phone calls I make today are going to pay dividends, hopefully down the road. But I have to be faithful in the daily grind and the film breakdown. And so that was probably the biggest thing that, as I think back on this first year, if I had to summarize it, trust the process. Stay faithful to what I need to do, making sure that I create an environment for players to be successful, that parents can trust and want their daughters to be part of, that players want to be part of. I mean, that's really the goal that I have, is that players will want to be part of our community for the game of basketball, but then also just to grow as women. So that we can go out and impact our communities wherever that might be, and whatever is next for us after the game of basketball.
Chris, again, and I think this ties into your season this year, how do you keep athletes engaged when winning isn't part of the experience in the short term? And I want to add to that, how do you then recruit athletes to your program when you've had, on paper, an unsuccessful year?
Absolutely. So addressing the one as far as keeping athletes engaged, I mean, we live in a society where we want results now. We want them instant. Right. And so making games within the games. And that's one of the things that this team I felt did a great job of. And I think that's why we did see improvements as far as numbers, as far as competitiveness, from losing from 20 points, 30 points to playing within 8 points second time around, and different things like that. But it is making the game inside the game. And while we can't control all the circumstances, we can control what we do. We can control our effort. We can control how we attack practice each day, regardless of how that game result is going to be. One of my philosophies is, if you don't want to lose, get better. And so practices, being able to plan a practice where it's competitive. We know what we need to work on and how we can do it, with different drills, different mindsets. And so that's part of it, is just creating an environment where it's not just about the scoreboard, although we all know it is. We all look at that scoreboard, but being able to break it down and say, okay, so how do we need to get better here? How do we need to get better here? And kind of bite size. I had the opportunity to work with Chris Hobbs, and one of his statements that he would say over the years would be, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And so a little bit even with the games, and that's partly going back to even trust the process, being able to connect with one another, being able to trust the sets that we're putting in, trying to trust each other on the court, so that then we can see the results that we want to see. When it comes to recruiting, I mean, that is challenging. I always think there's a silver lining. You just got to look for it. And so being a team of 3-22, we definitely had some struggles. At times, defensive speed was something that I see a great area of growth in. We have some great shooters, but at times being able to score off the drive, that was a struggle that we had. So with that, as far as recruiting, I can look at players at times and say, listen, depending on your skill set, depending on what you have to offer, you have potential that you could step on the court and make an impact immediately. I mean, there's some programs that freshmen and sophomores don't necessarily get a ton of playing time. And that's something that could be an opportunity. And so that has been one thing that even as I've talked to 2020 grads, I mean, they understand, especially if they're a player that's used to playing a lot of minutes, they're putting big numbers up at the high school level. How will their game translate to the college level? I mean, the speed and the speed of the game, the strength of the players at the college level is definitely bigger. Depending on how that high school player is, there might be a learning curve. And so at times, that's that silver lining. The learning curve might be a little bit less at a program like Cairn, to where you would get an opportunity earlier than maybe at an established program.
So kind of twisting it and using it
Absolutely.
almost as a positive of look, you can come in and really start, as opposed to you're just going to sit on the bench for a year at minimum.
Absolutely.
Another question that came in was from Faith. It says, is there a coach, not necessarily one that coached you, that has inspired you, one that you try to model their style?
That's a loaded question. Yes. Growing up, I had the opportunity to live in Tennessee for a couple years. My family moved around, and so I went to 3 different high schools. But my coaching style, I lived in Tennessee during the height of Pat Summitt. And so reading her book, The Definite Dozen, that probably had a lot of impact on my life, as far as just kind of the balance of being driven, and also kind of that I care about you more than just a basketball player. But then, like, that's one everyone knows. But just thinking back and looking back on the different coaches I had in my life, and the different role models, it has been something that has been such a blessing. I mean, moving around, it wasn't ideal, but looking back, the different people I was able to interact with. Stacy Bowers she was my 5th grade PE teacher. And why I say her name is she kind of set the tone at an early age for me to just think like, wow, this coaching, this teaching of athletics could be awesome. And Steve Miller, he's at Baptist Prep in Little Rock, Arkansas. I went to his camps in elementary school, and he's won state championships galore. Just a great basketball coach, X's and O's. But when I think of both of those individuals, the game was always bigger than just the game. It really was what their players were doing, not just with the ball, but in life, the choices they were making. I had a high school coach. He was also my history teacher, Mr. Kevin Templeton. And he was a coach that really just emphasized to me that I remember walking out, the choices I make today determine who I am tomorrow. And those are those same type qualities now, that as I think about what I want my players to know, those are the things that help shape me as a coach and as a person. And I'm so thankful for those individuals who poured into me during my playing days, and just had a lasting impact on me and my mentality. And I think those are the same qualities and kind of the same lessons that I definitely use with my players today.
Another question came in and said, Coach, what's the primary thing to focus on when building a culture? And I think this is an interesting one, particularly because you're right in the middle of this, trying to change what has happened in the past and build your own philosophy into your team.
Absolutely. You know, that is an excellent question. And I do agree. I'm right in the middle of it a little bit. But as far as building culture, I mean, I think a lot a lot lies on expectations. What are the expectations I have for my players? I mean, especially being new, they had several coaches before. Were my expectations the same? Were they different? Excuse me. I think it was very important that I set the expectation. Culture is that complex. It's so complex. I was just reading about it in the leadership playbook. There's the culture that happens when people are around, but the culture I want is that locker room culture. What are the decisions the girls are making? What are the things they're talking about? What is the vibe? And is it the same thing that I see when it's in my office, or is it the same thing I see on the court? I want it to be consistent. And so having that expectation, I think one of the things is, I think there has to be relationships that are built, and there has to be a level of transparency. I think when you let things go unaddressed, or if you just kind of turn your eye to it and not discuss it, I think that is where culture can, I might articulate it that it's a certain way, and we might say that it's a certain thing, but is that really what's happening? I read one of John Gordon's books, and some of this is I just stole from him, but like with my team, I mean, we talk about we want to grow in grace. And what is grace? Well, for us, we want to have gratitude, we want to have respect, we want to have accountability, we want to have commitment, and then we want to have enthusiasm with what we do. And so being able to kind of work through those pillars is what I like to call them. That's what I want our program to be. And I want players who want to buy into that. I'm not saying that it's going to be perfect all the time, because it's not, and there's going to be struggles. I think when we spend as much time with each other as we do, there's going to be times where we're going to grumble or whatnot, but no, that's not our goal. And so being able to keep each other accountable. But I think it really starts with building that culture, I think, with relationships. And you have to be willing to kind of link arms and work together.
You want to build this culture. You have an idea of what it wants to look like, but you're not in an environment in high school where these are the kids you have, work with it. This is an opportunity for you to go out and find athletes to join your program. Do you look for athletes who fit your mold, your culture, or do you find athletes who maybe are incredibly talented, maybe don't necessarily have that culture because they have never been taught that culture, and maybe you can teach it to them? Where's the balance between getting athletes who are already fitting into that mold versus getting people and understanding that you may be able to change them over 4 years?
Absolutely. And the answer is yes. Here's the thing. I think when I go out and I recruit, I watch film. I'm watching a ton of film right now. I am looking for, can they put the ball in the bucket? How's their handle? What's their quickness? But I watch the little things. When their teammate falls down, when their teammate scores, what is their reaction on the court? What's their demeanor on the bench? I had a female athlete send me her video, and as I watched, she said, well, I don't start. Fine, watch the video. But man, her demeanor on the bench was fantastic. Jumping up, cheering, whatnot. When she went in, running to the bench, running onto the court, giving her teammate a high five as she left. And someone might say, well, maybe that's just the culture that her coach set up. Well, the other girls weren't doing it all the time. So, I mean, part of it, I do look for certain intangibles like that. What are the players demonstrating with a player who might be like that awesome basketball player? Once again, I think it's the expectation. I think you have to be able to express the expectation. I'm a big one that I have a hard time saying you can't change. I don't believe that. I think that where there's a will, there's a way. And so being able to say, oh, here's the expectations and this is how we want to operate. If that's something that you want to try, even if it's something I don't necessarily see right now, just know I'm willing to link arms with you if you join us, but this is where we're headed. And so I think a lot of times, I think there's power when we're given a choice. I mean, we all like to be able to make our decisions and make our choice. And so for a player that maybe has some struggles, maybe has some issues, if they can understand what the expectation is and they want to try that, I'm willing to try. But I think it goes back to, if you realize that this isn't working, you also have to be able to have that open, honest conversation of where the struggle is. I think that's definitely a balance.
You have a situation in high school where discipline is different to college. Now, you talk about a culture and, getting those athletes to buy into that culture and, making the right choices. We don't always make the right choices. None of us do.
Completely.
Has it been difficult for you moving into the college level to kind of figure out discipline and structure when athletes maybe don't want to make the right decision every time, or maybe they want to and they still don't?
Yeah, I think at times it's based off of kind of how we hold situations. There's definitely times where you have to definitely give specific, like, nope, this is not happening, and so here's what's going to happen. It's funny. I'm a coach. I don't have a ton of team rules. I was talking about this with another coach just the other day. Like, hey, what team rules do you have? Do you have a lot of them? I really don't have that many. Really, the one team rule that we have is be on time. Like, when we step on the court, you're ready to go. But as far as disciplining, I'm one where I think and it goes back to that key relationship piece. I think they're able to make the decisions that they feel is best for them. But making those decisions, it doesn't mean that me, an assistant coach, and another team player won't sit down and talk through the situation. And that's just one of the things that even at the high school level, talking to the student athlete, talking to the athlete to figure out why they thought that response was best or what they thought. In the moment, in a game, we can't discuss it. I had a situation this year where there was a player that she led us in points, and she's a fantastic player. And her and I were having a disagreement. Pulled her, sat her down, and there was some confusion there. There was some, I don't understand why I'm being benched at that moment. And so being able to work through those situations, I think that's the key. And part of it is just, I think, even how I would like to be responded to, instead of just this top down, I'm the coach, so you do whatever I say. I think a little bit, that is a certain coaching style. It's just one that I do not think works best for me, more so than even the players. So I have definitely a more open dialogue to where even after that game, the player, myself, talked about it. I connect with my players, try to at least once a week through FaceTime calls or whatnot. And we laughed about that just the other week. Just that growing relationship and that strife during that time where there was conflict. And at the end of the day, as the coach, playing time is the kingpin. And there, in all honesty, going back to what you said, there was a misunderstanding between me and her with what I wanted at that point. She didn't understand what I wanted in the middle of the game, and I then didn't do a good job communicating it, but how we then link arms and work together. And that's one of those things that when I think of that one isolated situation, I think we're stronger because of it. But working through it, I at times have been called the most awkward coach, because when problems do arise, I think the best way to resolve conflict is what? Well, we're going to sit down and talk about it. And so being able to bring players in, even if it is they're upset with playing time or whatever, being able to address it to where they feel supported, they feel heard, even if we can't agree, even if it doesn't mean that the player who's upset they're not playing, they might not get any more playing time. but there's a two-way conversation. And I think that's the team dynamic. I think that's that culture to where there can be open conversation back and forth and dialogue, because I do want the players to take ownership. I want them to feel like they are being heard. And I think that's where teams are at their best. Knowing that at the end of the day, we may have to agree to disagree, and that's okay. The important thing is that we're still committed to working together.
Some more questions have come in. Alexandra wants to know, when did you know you wanted to become a coach?
I think that's a tough question. Even think in college, it didn't like really hit me that playing was going to come to an end. I just loved it so much. I loved playing. I loved everything, being around the game. I loved the summer workouts, the summer camps. But I knew I wanted to go into education and then teaching and coaching. It was just, my dad's a educator. And so education was just kind of a way of life. And so I don't know if I ever really knew when I wanted to become it. But I am so glad that I am. And I love it. It's a very rewarding, I say job, and it doesn't feel like a job, but the biggest thing is just past players and being able to have those relationships. I mean, the on-court stuff is awesome. Trying to work through the challenges that the game brings us each and every day. But those relationships that you form with players long after the playing days is something that's just, it's been a real joy to be part of.
Another question came in, again from Chris. Chris, what's the one thing you did this year with your team that you really felt worked?
You know, I think there was a point in the season where we kind of, I would say we had a family meeting where we just, after one of the games, it was a tough loss. It was not a fun loss. Being able to sit down and knowing at that point we knew each other just well enough to kind of peel back some of the layers. And I feel like once that happened, we changed some of the style of play. Some more directives were handed out. I don't think necessarily, well, we just had to put some more structure to it that would help us out, give some more specific guidelines. And when we did that, I think the players then took ownership a little bit more. And part of that might have been me helping them realize, like, okay, here's exactly what we want, kind of clarifying some of those expectations. And even at the end of the year, player evaluations, that is something else I think that has been a great help to me, even though I haven't been able to see the fruit of that. Being able to have open, honest conversations with them to where I want them to talk about the negatives that they felt, the positives as well, and everything in between. But I think that was something that helped. But why I mentioned that meeting specifically was because it ended up having an impact on the court in a positive way. And so if you look at the stats and you kind of look at our scores after that meeting and kind of just the openness there, things really started to change for us some.
When you talked just briefly about your evaluations at the end of the season, do you do them individually in person, or do you do an anonymous survey? How do you actually carry out evaluations? And if they are in person, which I think is what you were implying,
yeah,
how do you, be honest with me, athlete, when the athlete's like, well, if I really am honest, maybe I don't start next year. How do you make sure that they're able to really tell you like it is without your, judgment upon them?
Absolutely. I did do them live. They were supposed to be in person, but because of the virus and when we left school and whatnot, we did them all FaceTime. But I wanted to do them individually, and I sent the questions out to them ahead of time so that they could kind of think through, and it was also so that they could add anything. And like I said, this is my first year really doing player evaluations as far as I I did them at the high school level, but they were, I think the philosophy and the emphasis behind it was a little bit different. This was really, I wanted the players' feedback. I think another thing going along with the player evaluation is I had two great assistant coaches as well as a grad assistant that, man, they just did a phenomenal job. And going back to that relationship aspect, I definitely knew that there were things that players were unhappy about. And so in the player evaluation, being able to talk through some of that stuff and telling them, like, listen, I have an open door policy. You can come in at any time to say, hey, coach, what about this? Or, hey, have you thought about this? I don't look at that as a negative. In fact, I welcome that. I want them to feel open to share. I think because of some of that groundwork that we laid earlier, I would hope that that would play into then these end of year player evaluations. I don't know that as a coach, I could have a closed door policy, kind of like do it my way, don't question, let's go, and then try to turn around and have this player evaluation the way that I did. But the feedback I got was fantastic. And some of the questions I asked were not necessarily for them as a player, although we did talk about it, their goals, their desires, where it hit the season met their expectations, did it not meet their expectations? But then just point blank asking, what's something that you think I should have changed, or what's something that you think I got it wrong? I think sometimes as a coach, if you're willing to, I mean, we tell players all the time what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. And like you said before, like sometimes we get it wrong. Like sometimes we see it differently. And I think as a coach, it's important if I can turn around to players and say, hey, where do you think I got it wrong? And just the relationship that's built, I do think it takes time to build that, but being able to receive their feedback. And then I think it's just building the trust, because you're right. I mean, could there be a player that could be hesitant to really be open and honest to say something, knowing that they don't want it to affect their standing? That is true. I didn't see that necessarily this year that I'm aware of, but I definitely agree with you. That's something that could potentially be an issue.
Okay. Another question came in from Jenna. Kind of transitioning out of your first year, you've experienced your first year as a college head coach. What are some of your goals for this upcoming season?
Absolutely. The first thing really is, I think the recruiting piece is just so massive. I underestimated it, I think, just coming in with the amount of time, the amount of hours that it takes. And so there's definitely some things that I've thought through systematically to help me be more successful with recruiting and just connecting with different players. I've been able to connect with quite a few college coaches as well in our conference, and just find out a little bit about what's their recruiting policies, or procedures that they try to do. And they've been so helpful in just kind of helping me learn that whole scheme. So that's probably the biggest thing this next year that I'm looking forward to growing in that area. And then also just connecting with the area high school coaches, trying to build that network more, getting to know them, allowing them to get to know us a little bit with expectations. So really that recruiting piece, I knew it was going to be big. I knew it was going to be hard. But it's one of those things. I also feel like it's one of those situations where you've got to get that flywheel going. And I think coaches that have been able to get the flywheel going, at times that can benefit them, but it takes a lot of work. And so that is one of the things that even players know me that are now at Cairn. We have 2 recruits that are signed and are coming in. We have 4 other ones that we're kind of waiting on just because of the virus and seeing what pans out with different parts of the country that they're potentially coming from. But that recruiting piece has been probably the biggest thing that I've learned.
Could you give
I need to put some more focus.
Excuse me. Could you give one more specific example where you've learned that, something surprised you or you weren't prepared for? And you talked about getting advice from other people. Just for those who maybe have never recruited before, what are you talking about specifically?
So going out. So in the fall, like I went out to different fall leagues, watching players play, communicating with them, really trying to read the high school player for what their interest is in your
Okay.
school. So a lot of times players want to talk. They will talk to you. You can meet their parents. That's probably the best advice that I had given to me and is panned out, is getting the parents involved in the recruiting process earlier. Because if the parent's not really sold on your school, even if the student is, there's a chance you're still going to lose them. And so I think that was part of it. And then also getting them on campus. And that's been a challenge right now, of course, with the virus and whatnot. But being able to just get a better read on them earlier and how to do that has been some of the advice that I've received from coaches that has been very, very helpful.
Okay, thank you. Nikki has a question. What does your practice planning process look like? So I'd be curious as well. How do you plan your practices? But then how far out do you plan your practices?
Absolutely. So typically I have a calendar, especially at the beginning of the year, where I map out kind of the roadmap for where we need to go in time for our first game. So we have preseason where the athletes are working out. But then when I can finally step on the court with them, okay, I have that scope and sequence, really is what I call it, as far as from first day on the court to our first game, what needs to be put in, what needs to be reviewed, what needs to be worked on leading up to it. Then that scope and sequence is then broken down into the actual practice plan. On the bottom of my practice plan, it says failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And so I have very detailed practice plans as far as drills that I want done, the time limit that I want done. I have student managers that run the clock for me. My grad assistant helped out with that this year, helping me stay on task, because I'm one that, let's say we're doing meat grind or a rebounding drill, or rebounding is one of those things that we focus on every day in practice. I think it's just a key point in our game as far as boxing out, being able to secure the ball. But I can get lost in that drill. And a lot of times, because the drills are competitive, they love it. And so, but being able to do it for a certain amount of time, for a set amount of time, so that we can get to all of the things we need to get to in an appropriate way. Like I said, it's kind of just knowing where we're headed during the season, as far as teams coming up and games coming up. It shifts a little bit because, for sake of the conversation, we pretty much played a Monday, Wednesday, Saturday type. That's not true. We played a Wednesday, Saturday type schedule. And at times it would be Tuesday, Thursday, Saturdays. But so the balance of going over what we didn't get right the day before, as far as big concepts, and then kind of honing in with the upcoming opponent and what we need to continue to work on. But my practice plans are pretty detailed. And the clock definitely governs me. There is flexibility as far as, we're going to stick on this for a few more minutes. But I also think that's another way that you can keep players engaged. I think if you go into a practice and they know you're not prepared, it's a waste of their time. They're going to know it. And I think that's going to, in the end, hurt the culture. And so I think it's like I said, it's like trusting the process and knowing all these little things that you can control are going to end up affecting the big picture.
Anybody that uses the phrase scope and sequence, I know that they are an educator.
I know.
Now, transitioning a little, one of the things that I've researched and have an interest in is looking at coaching stress and burnout. And one of the studies that hopefully is coming out in January next year identifies this idea that many people think that stress and burnout is higher in Division I because of the greater publicity, more TV cameras, and so on. But what we found was there was no difference across the different divisions. And a Division III coach can have as much stress as anyone else, maybe because the responsibilities are that much greater across areas. You're responsible maybe for travel, where a Division I coach isn't. The other thing that we found was that female coaches particularly have higher levels of stress, which lead to burnout than their male counterparts. And so I'm curious, have you experienced higher levels of stress kind of coming up into the college level? And we all experience stress. How do you deal with it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think with coaching, there is a certain level of stress that comes with it. And I think depending on the person and their security level also plays into it.
That's a good point.
Because at the end of the day, the bleachers are full of people that are watching what you're doing, and your students, in a sense, are demonstrating what you've prepared them to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at times as a coach, you can feel offended if they didn't perform the way that they should, or whatnot. I definitely know. I mean, I think it also goes back to just kind of life, a little bit, at least for me. My faith plays a huge part in my life. And as much as I love the game of basketball, it's not an end all. But I do think that whatever our hand finds to do, we should do it with all our might, and we should pour everything into it. But understanding that I have no value, or my self-worth does not come from my win-loss record. Just like I don't want my players to think that their value comes because they can put an orange ball into an orange rim. They have value just because their creator made them and gave them breath to breathe. And so whatever we do, I want us to do it with excellence. But I think that my faith definitely plays into helping me manage the grind, because it is a grind. It's, do I shut the computer, or do I send 10 more emails to potential recruits? Or is there one more coaching video that I watch, or do I shut it and go for a run, or whatever it is? I definitely think that there has to be a balance. And we can't control all the circumstances. We can't control where all the student athletes are going to pick to go. I do think, like I said, we have to do our due diligence. And so I think that is something that I'm still working through, and trying to figure out that niche as far as what's the right time frame. But for me, I mean, my faith plays a big part in, one, giving me purpose, but then also two, keeping me in check with making things appropriate, and not letting just one area of my life, coaching, get so bogged down that other areas are falling off.
So what does Miriam do for fun?
Oh, I am a big family person. My parents live just a mile up the road, but I have siblings. There's 5 of us. We're all over, but connecting with them, connecting with friends. I live right outside New York City. If I have my way, just for fun, I love to escape, go in, see a Broadway show, hang out with friends, family, and whatnot. But being in Jersey, the Jersey Shore is a wonderful place to escape to, with a good book to read, to relax. So same thing, it's relationships. And so being able to connect with those people that I love and care about is something that helps also keep me sane. And understanding that there will always be one more game to watch, or one more coaching video, or one more recruit to reach out to. But at the end of the day, if I'm not healthy mentally, I mean, this week is NCAA is putting the emphasis on mental health. And if I'm not healthy mentally and spiritually and physically, I'm going to have a hard time being able to pour into my student athletes. And so just like them, I need them to be healthy so that they can compete at their highest level. The same thing has to be true of myself.
That's great point. Last question for me then is, you've been a high school coach for many years, and now you're a college coach. You've had your first year of experience. If you're to give advice to somebody who's maybe looking to get into coaching, or as an early career coach, what advice would you give them?
It's very rewarding. Takes a lot of time, takes a lot of energy. One of my former players, and who's also now a coach, she recommended a book called Inside Out Coaching. And I'd say this. I think why you want to go into coaching is very, very important. And I think that why can keep you in it. If it's just about the winning and the losing, you're a competitive person. I think that'll keep you in it for a while. But I think that could end up leading to burnout. But I think when you go in and you look at the student athletes and you see it as an opportunity for a short period of time for you to be in their life and have the opportunity to encourage them, to push them to become everything that God has for them to be. I think that's where coaching can really be an awesome tool. I think one area that I would highly encourage is just communication skills when getting into coaching, because whether I'm trying to communicate with my players, whether I'm communicating with my assistant coaches, with parents, with administration, communication is key. And being able to connect with people. And so that is one of the areas that I would encourage coaches to really grow in, and just to continue to read, to learn. Being a high school teacher, but now a coach, I mean, I think we do it a big disservice when we stop learning and when we think we figured it all out. And so being able to connect with other individuals with the sole purpose of continuing to grow, I think it's so important to never really hit that plateau of just burnt out or just leveled off. And so communication and continuing to learn.
Well, let's see if this works. There's the book you were talking about. Yeah. I was working quickly behind the scenes.
Yeah. I was going to say you're fast. Good work.
If you haven't read this book, by the way, I've read it as well. Excellent book. And Joe Ehrman is a well-known author and former NFL player. Miriam, thank you so much for joining me today, and I really appreciate your input. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, maybe have some more questions, what's the best way to do that?
The best way is just shoot me an email. Yeah, my email address is right there. Shoot it to me, and I would be happy to talk with you, give you any advice, or just connect with you on any level. So feel free to reach out.
Well, thanks again so much for joining me. Just a reminder, tomorrow, if you have an opportunity, join us again at 11 a.m. Eastern. Riley Dampier is the head coach and high performance program director for U.S. Rowing at the National High Performance Center in Oklahoma City. I've heard her talk before. She talks a lot about just the ins and outs of training for what sometimes is 4 years of preparation for one moment and one instant. And that's a different dynamic to a day in, day out grind, such as a basketball season. So I hope you join us tomorrow at 11 a.m. And also don't forget to subscribe to whether it be Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, whatever, to make sure that you get all of these contents. We're also building a podcast. I'll give some information about that in the coming days. But on behalf of myself and Miriam, thank you so much for watching.
Thank you.